It's so good to be here. I am so excited today because this past week I've learned some things that I never knew before the last couple of weeks. I'm working on a project that I think is really, I so much wish that somebody had taken me through this project in greater depth. I actually remember being introduced to the concept by one of my favorite professors, Dr. Well, he's a favorite doctor, but he was to me, David Bell, who's still alive, up in his 90s, still gets this email. Hi, Dave, if you're watching. Um, and still teaches, still has a positive attitude. His wife died quite some time ago now, but he has carried on and can't do what he once did in his advancing years. But I so much appreciate him as one of my mentors in my early years, along with a few others who are up in their 90s as well. Um, it doesn't seem to me that, they were really old when I was young, but they were like less than 10 years older than me, or around 10 years older than me. I think that's maybe why these men have made such an impression on me. I think that the best mentors for mentees are, roughly speaking, 10 years older than the person they're leading. With a younger person, often that shrinks. It could be 5 years to the freshman. The college senior seems like an old person. And maybe it stretches more than that. And obviously, we have an intergenerational capacity. But the further we are in distance from the struggles that a person is facing in their life, the more obscure they become in our memories and probably in our readiness to work with them. Well, that's a bit of an aside. What I'm excited about is that Dave Bell got me on a project that I never could finish, and it didn't work out well. But he got us to try and map the interaction between Jesus and other people. And I didn't realize that Jesus, in working with other people, concentrated on them individually and collectively. The answer to the question is how much time did Jesus spend in the crowd context? Well, I asked that question of a friend of mine, and he said, well, things are different today because this particular friend has experience is tilted towards the benefits of the large church. He had just told me about watching a video online at one of the massive churches in North America. And the bigness has always captured his attention. It hasn't captured mine, even though we're very good friends. Back in the day, I said, don't give me that. It's different today because you have such a reach and so on. Jesus could put a crowd together, a big crowd, the 5,000, but that's plus the men and children. So I say that's 15,000. That's an arena full. And he did it without any social media advertising or YouTube videos. The word of mouth strength of people gathering together was stronger then than we seem to experience today. And maybe that was a difference, that the face-to-face word of mouth was stronger then than today. But don't tell me it's different. It's the same. But where did Jesus put his emphasis? The answer to the question is, how much time did he spend with individuals? And were they first-time contacts with individuals? You want to know that as well. Because all of us need to understand, if we're going to be like Jesus, we say we'd like to be like Jesus. How much time did he invest? Yes, I know. He invested a lot of time with the 12. Got it. The training of the 12, we went through that. That was A.B. Bruce's emphasis. The master plan of evangelism, that was Coleman's emphasis, and a very much needed emphasis then, and still continuing today. But how about the people that he met for the very first time? What was the ratio of time Jesus in his individual work spent with them? Answer's coming up. That's what I've been working on. I couldn't have told you that 2 weeks ago, but I know now, and I'm not going to tell you today. How about the small groups of people, the time that he spent with the disciples? Hey, how many of these events, both of those events, were the disciples, particularly thinking and focus on the 12, onlookers to what Jesus was doing. When they ripped the roof off the house and let the man down, obviously the disciples were there watching what Jesus did and how he handled the interruption. It's a wonderful story. I love that story. And we need to see these things as exhibitions of Jesus creating a demonstration and an example of how we should be relating to people. Now, we're not going to perform miracles like he performed miracles. That's just not going to happen. I got to plug her here. There we go. But he was there training his disciples by being an example to them. So we know that he could arrange a mass rally. So after the mass rally, did he say, "Oh, that was good, let's do it again"? No. We only had feeding of 5,000, feeding of the 4,000. Those were the huge rallies, if we want to use today's term, that Jesus did. How much time did he spend with large groups? That's very important, because if we know the answer to that, we should know what we should put the emphasis in. Now, in church today, most people do not, and most evangelicals go to larger churches, about 75% of the people. And therefore, since the staff to the participant ratio in a church is about the same, it's about 75% of those employed in ministry, full and part-time, are in churches larger than the midline. What is the midline? Most people don't know, but what I can tell you for sure is that the evidence would point today that the midline is getting smaller and smaller, and churches are getting smaller. And in terms of numbers of churches, there's as many of them below the midline as there are above the midline. Midline right now is around 60, maybe 55, maybe shrinking to 50. How much time in the mega churches, in the mega groups, how much time did Jesus spend? Not the mid-sized groups. About 20% of his effort was there. Why? Well, he didn't say, "Okay, let's take these 15,000, before we send them home, let's make sure they got literature and get them organized into small groups or big groups, or, Peter, you've got this group over here. Andrew, you've got this group over here. Judas, you've got that group over there." How would that have worked out for them? He could have. He was certainly smart enough to do it, but he didn't do it. So it's important for us to understand the nuggets within the scriptures of what Jesus actually did do, so that we can form an opinion and start from ground zero and rebuild our thinking of what church should be like. Our problem is we look to the traditions. Our traditions are what we think of as a church. If you come out of seminary or Bible college, you have an idea of a church. And I'm going to say 99 times out of 100, the ideation in your mind is a building. And you may have in mind that building with 200 seats and 30 people. And they may say, "Oh, we want to do things all new again. We want you to come and be our pastor." And they slather the butter on, and as thick as could be, and then they pour maple syrup on this. "You're the man, because we need to reach young families in our community, and you're young, and you've got the enthusiasm of youth, and you're going to fix everything for us." And you get there, and they say, "Okay, fix it." And it doesn't work out very well, and most people quit and say, "No, I'm not cut out for this." No, they got the wrong attitude. They got the wrong model of what they can do. Maybe not cut out for it. I entertain that. But what they're cut out for is first and foremost to build a foundation of understanding what Jesus did, and then what Paul in particular and the other apostles did afterwards. And somehow we rewrite all of that data back into our cultural paradigm and the photographs we carry around in our mind, our mental mind map of what a church should be like. And we keep replicating the same stuff. Well, church attendance is dropping, and there are happy exceptions, but overall, church attendance is dropping. Our evangelical footprint has moved from the gospel, sad to say, in North America, to seeing if we can make a difference through politics. maybe we can elect some people who bring this world to where it ought to be. Folks, did Jesus tell you to go and elect people? No, he said, render to Caesar what he gets. Let Caesar deal with his stuff. You deal with your stuff. And your stuff, oh, so how excited am I about this concept? I've taken a look at all of this data, and I've used some mathematical formulations to create some hints about what we should be doing going forward. How many people did Jesus talk to, as recorded by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for the first time? That would be decent to know, because that would tell you if you're going to be a leader and other people are going to follow you, and you're maybe a pastor or a deacon or or a Sunday school teacher of maybe half a dozen primary kids, because that's what you've got in your church. How are you going to demonstrate that you're the example to them, and that you say you'd be like Jesus, and yet you don't demonstrate before them what Jesus did? So you're going to have to ask yourself the question, how did Jesus treat new relationships? It's an important question, isn't it? And we're going to get to that before we're done this series. And I think you're going to be excited like I am about the fresh potential, no matter where you are. You don't need a revolution. You need an evolution. And you don't need an evolution that you sneak up on people and impose upon them. You need one that you bring along with them and you say, follow me as I follow Christ. That's what Paul said. So follow. Now, here's today's thing. I gotta hurry. I'm way into this and I haven't started yet. There's a verse that's tucked in the Gospel of John. Bet you don't know what it is. We have there's no way to bet on this, really. Don't get me off on that one. Now people are looking for endorphin release with gambling. Oh my, what a poor way to invest your life. Okay, so if we look at John's Gospel, now John's Gospel is unique. It's not like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He fills in a lot of holes that Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't fill in. For example, if we go to John chapter 2, there are several things that happen here. The one you know about is the turning water into wine, where Jesus goes to this wedding about maybe 4 or 5 miles from home in Cana, from where they were in Nazareth. It was home for Mary, and obviously they had a network of people, and they at this party, and they run out of wine. Mary comes to, you know the story. I won't review it for you. And the other story you might know, which is, in terms of its placement, is somewhat controversial. Not a big controversy, but his cleansing of the temple. And you know the story about the whip and the money changers and so on. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this in the last week of Jesus' life, an event like this or this. John records a second event, or perhaps, as I think the majority of people who've studied this, I'm not with them, this was the same event that happened later, but for the purpose of setting the stage for what was going on in this new movie, he moved it right into the front, where there's this difficulty in with the people responding to Jesus as was happening coming up to the crucifixion. The argument is that he brought it to the front of his gospel thematically to kind of give you a snapshot of what was coming. And there's a lot of controversy in the Gospel of John, and so he sets that up. So we've got the miracle, and then we've got the cleansing of the temple. I think it was likely a second event, but it doesn't really matter. What does matter to me is embedded between those two events is, I think, one of the most significant events that we have in the New Testament about how Jesus trained the 12. Tell you about it until I tell you that Luke and John also indirectly made reference to this kind of an event. And it's the kind of event that we would today call a retreat, where you go somewhere else other than your normal environment. And sometimes that's very important for people to hit a reset button and to get a fresh thing. I think it's a great idea for church boards to get away for retreats at least once a year, probably once a quarter would be smart, where you go to, I don't know, I don't care where you go, some campground tent or some fancy hotel. It doesn't matter to me how much you spend on it, as long as you see this as a time to say, how are we doing? Really, how are we doing? One of the first rules of leadership is to define what is. And you have to define what is by what is going on. In a large church, so often they say, we're doing well, look at the attendance numbers. Yeah, but who are these people? They say, oh, we get all these converts from everywhere. You will study the data. You will find out that it's a very rare church that's a large church that converts more people from being non-disciples to being disciples than small churches do on a ratio basis. Oh, that's not true in our church because we got a great evangelism program. I'm telling you, you probably don't. Look hard at the data. Now, what you'll find is that people will sneak up on you and say, oh, no, we were totally unchurched and this is wonderful. They just don't want to tell you about the church they dropped out from 6 months ago because they didn't like something that went on there and they wanted to hide in the back rows. So, no, we're unchurched. Well, they hadn't been to church for 3 months, so I guess they're sort of unchurched. But no, you'll find out when you drill down that they have a background almost always, that they don't come as what I call, it's kind of a pejorative term, I think, but ice cold pagans, people who they just know nothing about the gospel. You'll find that most of these big churches are just collecting people that have come from smaller churches or who have dropped out. And by all means, there's nothing bad about that, but don't think that's winning people. Hey, that's another. I just got to hurry. I got way too much that I'm trying to pack into this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go. What's the event? This is a critical event. Luke and John mention similar events. John later in the gospel and John early in the gospel. Mark doesn't mention it. Matthew doesn't mention it. But it is a framing reference of how Jesus worked with people. So we're going to hustle through this. And I'm going to give you an absolute money back guarantee, since this was free, that in fact, you don't know this verse exists. But if this verse exists, and if it's inspired, and if it's instructional, and if John put this material together, he certainly did, inspired and put it together in a sequencing that didn't necessarily or may necessarily have represented historical sequence, and it may be done theologically or thematically. I'll let the smarter minds than me debate that, and I don't think it's worth the debate, frankly, because I think what is worth the debate is taking a look as to what was going on here in John chapter 2, verse 12. Okay, with the wedding feast. After this, the wedding feast and the turning of water into wine, Jesus went down to Capernaum, about 25 miles, maybe 30 miles from Cana over here to Capernaum. It's a reversed here in my mind. They're just fine. Down near close to the Sea of Galilee, Cana and Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, were somewhat close to each other. And they were in the Galilee region, but they were not as near the sea. And Capernaum was right down at the sea. He went down to Capernaum with some people. His mother, she didn't go back home from Cana to Nazareth. He went with Jesus on this retreat. And his brothers. And his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. Okay, so this, I think, is absolutely critical. Why is it critical? Because Jesus has gone from being just a guy, just a perfect guy, roughly 30 years old, and with his brothers, who we got to presume were born sometime around a decade. So these are young adults, teenagers, young adults, his brothers. Who are these brothers? Now, it's quite interesting that it's quite clear from the scriptures that it says they're brothers. Well, brothers, because, he was rich and poor, and that. Brothers with the previous marriage from Joseph, There's no evidence of that. But there is a segment of the Christian history that started in the 2nd century where they wanted to keep track of what they wanted to have as a doctrine, the perpetual virginity of Mary, that for some reason they thought she shouldn't have sex. I don't get that. I don't get, but there's a lot of people who still believe that. But these brothers, and Jesus had sisters as well, all went together. What for? Doesn't tell us exactly what for, but I think before we get to Jesus going to Jerusalem, and, this is their way up the north and then down to Jerusalem, and it may well be that it wasn't actually that it occurred sequentially in the way we would think of things, but these things occurred thematically. But regardless, sandwiched between is this one verse. Now, generally speaking, we've been following the master plan of evangelism. Like Coleman, I'm using that as my springboard. But I can't help myself. I got to go throw my stuff in as well. Coleman, it's a great book. I think it's incomplete, and we'll get to that. And I think the training of the 12 was incomplete, judging by what I've learned over the last few months. But this Capernaum retreat, he's traveling after Cana and the miracle. He's got this mixed group of people going to Capernaum, and it's a few days before, as John positions it, the Jerusalem Passover. This was an inaugural event that he doesn't say. John does say it was the first miracle. He doesn't say this was the first retreat, but he records it as if it is the first retreat, and I think really critical. So they've had this wedding ceremony and this turning of water into wine, and they got a 25-mile walk. That is a full day, maybe 2 days on the road. And Jesus saying, hey, come on, guys, we're going to Capernaum. What do you think they talked about on the road? I love to speculate this walk and talk times. There's over 3,000 miles that Jesus walked during his ministry, and we presume almost all of it with other people. That's when the silent training occurred. We don't know much about, very little, what was going on in that time. But when people are going for a walk together, they're going to talk. And they're not necessarily, I call these face-to-face encounters, but these are side-by-side encounters. There's something special about when you're going for a walk or even when you're traveling in a car. In the side-by-side, you are not forced to have eye-to-eye contact, but you have ear-to-ear contact going on. It's a kind of an important little nuance to what can go on in the conversation. Maybe somebody's a little discouraged and looking at the ground as they walk and so on. They've got hours of conversation. So can you imagine? Well, you have to speculate on this. I've got Peter and Andrew, and then I've got James and Josie's over here on the other side. You tend to pair up in twos or threes when you're going walking. Did Peter go over to Josie's and say, hey, what'd you think about that wine? That was very something, wasn't it? Did he? I don't know. I suspect that it's impossible to spend a whole day standing beside one person when there is a dozen of you in a group traveling. So they've had all this time to process this recent miracle. Jesus and his mother. Interesting. So Mary's not so old. So if she's a virgin, she's 16 years old. Jesus is in his late 20s, and you put it together. Well, this is a long walk for this middle-aged lady. But she's there with them. I can imagine she's saying, oh, I don't know, this isn't going to end well. It isn't going to end well. I got these guys who are following Jesus, and they're these newbies, and they're naive, and they love Jesus, and I'm glad they love Jesus. But my other sons, they have been so jealous of Jesus because he was so perfect growing up, and they thought, Mom loved him best. And I can imagine all this buzzing around in Mary's mind. And imagine it doesn't tell us this, but you kind of know that the mother's concerned about them all getting along with each other. And the skeptics and the new followers were all there together. The disciples were believers. It tells us that they believed in him. We've got We're not exactly sure who is in the group, but we are pretty sure that we've got Andrew, Peter, Philip, Nathaniel, and John, because John's there to tell the story. So I got 5 of these newbie disciples, and then I got 4 brothers. So we got 9. I got Jesus, he's 10, and I got Mary, she's 11. The disciples are just overwhelmed and excited about what they've seen. But we get the brothers who didn't believe. What are they saying? I wonder how he did that. Where did you find that trick from? I've seen those kinds of tricks before. He must have brought someone with him that he threw in the jars when people weren't looking. And John tells us clearly during his ministry, they didn't believe in him. And Mark tells us that they actually wanted to be handlers of Jesus as he was becoming famous and out there in public and doing stuff and all these miracles. They thought he was nuts. They wanted to kind of manage him. So they cared enough to not embarrass the family name. Where's Joseph in all of this? Well, I don't know. Just some would speculate that Joseph is dead by now. Not an unreasonable assumption, and not unreasonable to say that Joseph, when he and Mary got married, that he was older than Mary and therefore was up into middle age, and they died at a much younger age, typically, then than we did now. So speculation, nobody knows for sure, but he's not mentioned, so maybe he's not even in the picture anymore. Here we've got 2 of those 4 brothers of Jesus. Well, apparently, after the resurrection, came to believe in him. James, a leader in the church, and Jude, who also wrote the letter of Jude. And those guys wrote really hard-hitting stuff. Isn't that something? The people who were the skeptics, they write some of the most hard-hitting stuff in the New Testament. That should tell you something about what you should be doing and who you should be working with. Now, that's about who you should be working with. I won't even have time to get back to that, but you want to think about that. That you've got, you don't set the skeptics aside. You take them along with you on the retreat. I don't know about your church board retreat. I'm not sure. But you keep them engaged in the process, even though they may not yet be fully on with you. If they're willing to take the trip and do the walk and have to spend a few days there, then have to walk back home, hey, why not have them come along? So now we've got the issue of Capernaum. I'm going to really rush here. Why did Jesus choose Capernaum? We know that, and Matthew said he made Capernaum his base of operations. And he said, woe to you, you nitwits at Capernaum. If the miracles that I did in your town have been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, Jesus got really mad about the fact that they weren't responding real well in Capernaum. But he chose that. Why? Well, some will speculate, and I don't think it's a bad idea. It's a major trade route all the way over in the east, Iraq, Iran, that area, around the Sea of Galilee, through Capernaum on the way down to Egypt. It would be a route on which things would travel. When people are walking, they talk. And when they talk about the game last night. They talk about current events. You know that they talked about, hey, did you eat? This new dude apparently turned water into wine. I can't believe that's true. Pull that trick off. No, I really believe. These kinds of discussions must have gone on. Bethsaida, about 5 miles away from Capernaum, where 5 of the disciples, 4 we know were fishermen. That's probably where they sold their fish, and so they're back and forth on the road talking to each other. Jesus makes it a permanent ministry base in Capernaum. Spent more time in that area than he did probably about 2 months down in the Jerusalem area. Again, we don't have a precise calculation of these things. The disciples, without doubt, had questions. The brothers, without doubt, in the discussion, brought their skeptical perspective into things. They needed some time to figure this stuff out, to understand the meaning that's contained in these events. And it took his brothers decades to come to faith. It took the disciples certainly more than the 3 years they were with him, to come to terms with. I never understood that term, to come to terms with what all this stuff meant. Um, Maybe there's a component here that they needed the retreat time because of the emotional high of the wedding and then the emotional high of the controversy of the temple. Yeah, I don't know, maybe. But what we do know is Jesus was willing to engage difficult relationships, hard conversations. He didn't avoid his brothers. He obviously welcomed them to come along on the retreat and didn't say, no, this is for the believers, not for you guys. He didn't have, this is for the upper crust and this is for you wannabes. No, he used controversy throughout his ministry. He planted seeds in these guys that grow. So what are we going to make of it? Let's run through a few ideas as to how this may apply. And you have to sort this out. You can ponder this. You can sit down and with a notepad, and if you actually use a notepad or a stylus on a tablet, the actual act of writing will be stronger for you in your brain going forward. If you understand what was going on in here and also in the other events that we don't have notes from, Luke records, and probably every day during the last week of Jesus' life, with them debriefing and dating each other. What should you be doing with people? Invest in a few people who are willing to invest back with you, and they don't necessarily all have to be strong believers, but people who are willing to sort things out. Maybe what's going on inside them is not what they're saying. I'm not buying that. They might be saying it, but they might be feeling and meaning more than that. You need to have the perspective of time where, as it were, you put your feet up and have quiet time to have dialogue with leaders. By the way, how often with Jesus encounters with other people, was it dialogue and how much was monologue where he was doing most of the speaking? That would be useful information for you to have, wouldn't it? We're going to get that to you over time. You got to stay with it. Maybe these breaks that he had, I think, were illustrative through his ministry. I mean, there were probably at least 3 Passover feasts. That was a big deal. We know that Jesus and his family went up to the Passover, and we don't know a lot about the Passovers except the last one. But those breaks were important. They were built into the New Testament. We'd call them vacation time. But there were festival times as well where you broke from the regular places and the regular routines. Don't kick all the doubters out. Don't invest too much in them. Don't take them too seriously when they say, that's a load of bleep. Say, I believe it, and move on. I give them the time and the space. Show them that you care about them as much as you care about others. Show them the dignity of respect. So many people want a place where they can be respected. Listen to their objections. And while you want to jump in and give them the answer to the thing, let them spin out their story. They don't know what they think about their story until it comes out of their mouth, or even more intensely off the end of their fingers, pencil or a pen or a stylus. James became a pillar in the church. Why? He grew up with this perfect kid. He had come to the place where he'd resisted, and somewhere along the line he said, no, this is stupid. Why resist it? It's all true. Your mixed group that you have in your life is the mixed group that Jesus had. You got family members around you who don't buy what you're selling. I get it. They don't want to drink what you're drinking. But stay in touch with them. Stay in love with them. Keep moving forward. You don't know. It might take 20 years, but they may come to Jesus in due course. Your skeptics today may surprise you going forward. I want you to spend some time thinking about that retreat and speculating in your own mind what might have gone on. It will help you sort out how Jesus did. WWJD, what would Jesus do, has got to be built on WDJD, what did Jesus do? And one of the little snippets I got excited about this week, and I hope it excites you. And I do hope that you'll spread the message. One of the things that happened in the New Testament was they gossiped the gospel. One of the things that doesn't happen to the degree that it should happen today is that we don't gossip the gospel. Pass it on to people you know. Say, would you watch Carter's lesson with me on this? And then we can have a discussion. You'll have a rich time together. Forget all the places that I misspoke. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do this for the glory of God. And I sincerely hope you will be blessed as well.